Today, my guest is Melissa Cleaver. Melissa is a professional learning specialist in early childhood education, educational technology, and art integration. Melissa has over 25 years of experience in education, spending 2 decades in pre-K to 8th grades, inspiring innovation and creativity in her classroom, earning her the 2015 Nebraska Elementary Art Educator of the Year Award. Melissa has worked for Common Sense Media as an outreach manager. She provides consultations, professional development workshops, and presentations at national conferences. Melissa earned her Master of Education in Elementary Administration from Concordia University, Bachelor of Science in Education from University of Nebraska, Omaha, and an Early Childhood endorsement from Creighton University. Melissa is the mother of 3 adult children. She's a new Grammy to one and a Basset Hound enthusiast. Yeah. She is dedicated to building strong, spiritually connected communities that center around children. Melissa says, to learn more about my deep thoughts, I have a dearly neglected blog, Glimmer Ed, that I hope to rededicate some attention to again soon. And you can find that at glimmer-ed.com. Melissa, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me. This is wonderful. Now, that new Grammy, like literally 4 days ago. That's how new.
Oh, wow.
Like that new. So new title, new one to wear.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
oh,
pretty exciting. Yeah. So there was a lot of debate. What do I get a call? What am I going to be called? I can't be Grandma Cleaver because there's already a Grandma Cleaver. I have to be somebody else. So I'm Grammy.
Grammy.
Yeah. I had a long time thing. I went through a lot of iterations of what to be called, and then finally ended up with that. It's like, and my husband was like, I never thought I would have to think about what we're going to be called. I'm just Grandpa. And I'm like, because there's nobody else with that title. So you're good.
That's right. Oh, that is so fun. Grammy has a fun sound to it.
Yeah. I was trying to make Nana Oma work, and I loved the idea of it, but it just didn't flow. And so I was like, no, okay, Grammy. It's Grammy.
I love that you've chosen your moniker. You have said, this is what it'll be, and this is what you'll call me. Well, and it came out of
thinking about like language development with children. I mean, everybody was like, well, just let him figure out what it is. It's like, well, he's going to pull that off of what people are addressing me as. So that's how language development works. It's not just that he's going to pop into his head. This is what I'm going to call her. I mean, that may still evolve for him, but he has to hear something to be calling me. So there we go. Grammy for now.
That sounds perfect. Your expertise just lends itself so beautifully in this, in all family dynamics. That's awesome. Well, I enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. I know you through your brother, Aaron, who was a guest on the podcast last year. And I thought it would be really interesting to speak to you as an educator and also somebody who has such a vast and wide breadth of experience in the educational field, someone who is focused on really, really little kids and, all the way through to 8th grade and everything in between. So I know you and I spoke about your experience in the classroom. I know you're currently not in the classroom daily anymore, at least for now, but you had talked about the environment that you created, the space and your intentions around the space that you wanted to create for these children. And there was a particular class or grade level that you were, I think, focused on for a while. And I would love to hear that story again, if you would share it.
Yeah, sure. And just for a little background, it's really important as an educator when you first get to know a group of kids of setting out what are the boundaries, what's the space going to be like, and helping create that space of comfort for them. So, because they're coming in with all kinds of stuff, whatever's going on. And so at the beginning of every year with all my grade levels, because I mostly taught art, and I focused mostly in the elementary. So I would see everywhere from pre-K kids all the way up to sixth graders. But this particularly resonated when I would do this exercise at the beginning of the year with my fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, particularly. And for whatever reason, it seemed to really resonate with my boys too, primarily. And having had the ability or the experience to be with this group of students, oftentimes from when they were in pre-K all the way up to sixth grade, I really got to know kids quite well and kind of know what was going on in their lives. So what I would do at the start of my class to create a space where they felt safe, where they felt comfortable, and they knew that I was seeing them and allowing them to be them, kind of to your title of shine, allowing them their best way possible to come in to shine, is when I would greet them at the door, they would learn that they could leave their baggage at the door was the phrase I would say to them. But the first day of class, I would go through kind of a exercise to understand this concept of what it meant to leave the baggage at the door. So I'd usually pick out a kiddo that I'd maybe known that had particular struggles sometimes in his regular classroom with the classroom teacher or wherever. And I would ask that they would mind volunteering, and oftentimes they were thrilled. If they didn't want to, I wouldn't force anybody. And so they'd come up, and I would talk to the kids about how when you come through those doors that are into this room, I want you to know that whatever happened prior to coming through those doors, that doesn't need to come into this space. This is a space where we get to be creative and innovative and explore things and ask questions and all that kind of stuff. But whatever's happening, outside, that gets to stay there. And I said, so for example, let's say you woke up this morning and you couldn't find your shoes. And so then I go over the stack of books that I have. And usually they were like my art history books from college that were like this thick and, 2-3 inches thick. And then I would take that book and I would hand it to the kid that was standing there and let it plop down into his arms because he'd have his arms stretched out in front of him. And so that first book went in. And then I go, and then say you went to get milk for your breakfast and it spilt all over. Oh, there's another book, and I throw it on top of his arms, and then we just kind of keep going through the day, like the scenario of you missed the bus, or your mom yelled at you, or your brother stole something from you, or you fell on the ground and tore your pants. I mean, there's all these things. And keep adding. You get in the classroom and your friend is ignoring you, whatever. And I just keep adding books to his arms, and they start to weigh, and they're standing there just caring, and the rest of the kids are watching this happen. And I said, so say you're coming into the day like this. I go, what I'm going to let you have the ability to do is go over to that door and just drop those books over there. And so typically the kid would walk over there and drop them. And you could just see in the face of this child and the kids that are watching this happen too, this like sense of relief. And I talk about that pressure, when you let go of those books, how did that feel to let go of all that and just leave it there? Inevitably they'd be like, yeah, just like that was getting heavy. Or some of them would be kind of funny and be like, no, that wasn't heavy at all. And I go, oh, we can go get them again if you want. We can add some more books on, just trying to make light of it. But yeah, it was just this exercise for them to recognize that they don't need to carry that into this space. We can leave it at the door. And so it became the catchphrase as they would come to class each week of, do you need to leave any bags at the door? Or if something started to happen in the midst of a class that started adding some baggage, I would be like, do you need to go do a baggage check? And the kids knew that was the cue too, that if they needed some space, that it was okay to just take a step out and not the, excuse me, not the proverbial go to the hallway, feeling that, was kind of punitive or shaming in any way. It was more about, I recognize you're needing a space right now, and maybe it's not in front of your peers. So if you need to go check some bags at the door, go ahead and take that space, or I'd find another space depending on the setup of that particular classroom that year, because it would change from year to year sometimes. So finding kind of a safe place so that they could go and just take a minute if they needed it. So
what a powerful exercise. And it makes me, of course, naturally think about adults and how much we might want to do that kind of exercise for ourselves.
Or in a meeting I'm at work, it's like, I need to go check my bags at the door. I'm sorry. I'm having a minute. So,
Yes. Right. Because for any human, life gets heavy. I mean, it's just inevitable. It's not that you're a bad person or not that, you're doing something to attract stress. I mean, it's just that is part of life. And then once you kind of know that that's maybe how things are going to go in life, like there are going to be times that are stressful, some more than others, then you can allow yourself the grace and the opportunity to say, you know what? Yeah, maybe right now I don't need to hold on to this. And it's just so empowering. And so then to start young people with that mindset and that ability to
the permission.
process and the
Yeah.
permission,
Yeah.
it's very powerful. What do you think, Melissa, that in your experience all these years with young people and kids, what do you think is the number one thing that children, young people are looking for when they show up to school, when they show up? I mean, I know it's a big question because we could answer that just in general, but when they show up to spaces where, they may not be with their families, what is it that they're really needing to know or to feel, kind of above and beyond the basics, of math, art, English, all of that
Sure.
stuff? There's got to be a common denominator.
Yeah, I think even before you can get to the math and all those things, to me, and I've been reading this really wonderful book. I have to always look. It's a wonderful book, but for whatever reason, I stumble on it. But it's Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity. It's by Floyd Cobb and John Carnapple, and I am just so in love with it. This concept of belonging and that need for that. I mean, all of us as human beings, I think, and maybe it's just it resonates with me because it's just part of me of like I'm always looking to belong, but I feel like that's a common thing for everybody. And if we can create a space where everybody in that classroom, and I especially think of marginalized children, of helping them feel, and marginalization can look in so many different ways too, you might not even know. And so the educator's responsibility is to really understand each of those kids and what is the thing that's going to make them belong. It's not like a one trick pony of like, I do this and everybody feels belonging. It's like, how do they get to know that individual on a personal level, each one of those students in their care, that they are serving. I think that's also another concept. I'm serving them. I'm not, But yeah, really just creating that space of belonging, because without that, then it's really hard to move up on the achievement scale. We look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's like right there at the root of things. And if you don't have that, being able to think critically and talk about math and science and reading and art and all those things is it's just going to be a huge barrier to being able to get to access that part of their brain, anyways, so to me, that's right. And I think it's a lot right now. It's kind of a buzzword in education, social emotional learning, which I get kind of like, I don't know, another buzzword. So people are going to take it as this kind of thing, rather than really looking at it as how it's really an essential building block to the education system, which that goes in a whole nother field of our education system, the shifts and changes that are occurring and need to occur. It's a system that is crumbling, and I think that's an okay thing. It feels really uncomfortable, and most educators will be like, no, I want to have but I think if we're going to continue to evolve as a humanity into being our best selves, then these systems are going to have to kind of break down, and we're going to have to kind of rebuild them. And I think this part of belonging is maybe one of those foundational building blocks that is going to come out of this rebuilding of what our systems need to be in education. But anyway, I could go on and on.
It's really fascinating to me. It's such a holistic approach that's, I think, needed to look at education, the success of education. And so I appreciate what you're saying. And I'm curious, since you were an art teacher for so many years, curious if there's anything interesting that ever came through when the work that children did. In other words, were there any themes or anything that really stood out in terms of just things that surprised you through the artwork that children made that that reminded you or really opened your eyes to the capacity that children have?
Oh, I think that's such a good thing. I mean, oftentimes we look at children as less than, because they're smaller and they maybe haven't developed. But I found even all the way down to my very youngest kids in the classroom, like we look at a piece of art and I've looked at, I've done maybe the lesson a bazillion times, and had these conversations and asked these same questions. But the perspective that different individuals, even at very young age, and the thing that they would maybe see in that piece of artwork was so unique and so mind-blowing to me that I'm like, I've never noticed that before. I mean, I've been looking at this thing forever. To me, it was just beautiful to see that. And then to not just for me get to experience seeing that, but then to elevate that child into saying, wow, you saw that in there. And that's something pretty awesome and unique and special. I'd say that was one thing that I take away from the years in the classroom in teaching art. Just, I love that every time it happened, and it happened often. It wasn't just it happened often at all different grade levels. I'd also say, I think a lot of people discount what children are absorbing in society and what's happening around them. And in my art classroom, I can't speak for other art educators, I often and was very adamant about wanting to have a space where children could create art to express some of that, of whatever emotions or feelings or thoughts or things that are happening, rather than more craft art, and there's a place for craft art, and there are artists and art teachers that do craft art, and kids are maybe developing some skills around certain things. But I wanted to try to create it where it was, and I had a particular lesson that I absolutely adored doing with fifth grade that was kind of around social justice. And we would, this is going to take me a minute to assess who are the artists that we studied? We studied a Latino artist that was depicting the Los Angeles riots in the 60s and would do the piece of art. Gilbert Lahan, I think was the name. I might be wrong on that, but he would depict it by showing kind of the scene of a corner in LA with the cars lined up and then these police on horseback, which somewhat resembled the Mexican Revolution in the same kind of scenario of happening. And so we would look at that image, and then we would look at some images by one of my favorite artists, Jacob Lawrence, and how he depicted the Underground Railroad and this whole series with Harriet Tubman, and we would analyze it and break it down, and I'd ask the kids to look at the perspective. There's an image of Harriet Tubman in the perspective. It looks like you're standing above her, almost looking down. And then later on, there's another image of Harriet Tubman where she's laying on the ground, and you're seeing her feet right up at the front, at the forefront of you, and you're almost looking up at her, and past her and above her are two people that she must be helping on the Underground Railroad. It's a small family. And so and it's kind of abstracted, and it's hard to understand what's happening in it. And I'd ask the kids to look at these images, and we would talk about the difference between the first image of Harriet Tubman, where she's sawing wood or doing some sort of chore, and how it's being looked down upon her, and why the artist would go at that angle, and then why then changing it to the feet looking up at her, and the things that the kids would say and the connections they would make. And these are fifth graders, just really breaking it down, and the connections they would make to current situations in society. It was just amazing. And I would share this with other art teachers that taught high school art, and they would be like, "What? Your fifth graders are talking about that?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." You give them the space, and they just they can illuminate a lot. So,
right, yeah.
After looking at kind of the style of Jacob Lawrence, they would then create an image of who they wanted to be. Thinking about their future selves, what kind of career, what kind of path, and they would create out of cut paper, and just every single time, all levels of whatever capacity or level of artistic ability, you could just see the passion in the work. They were just so intent and engaged in creating that particular assignment. I wanted to just let them have as much time as possible, even though sometimes that wasn't possible, but because they were just so engaged with that assignment. Yeah, it was one of my favorites. I miss it. I get all lit up thinking about it.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. You can see that you have such a talent for teaching in that realm. And what you're saying also really underlines the point that, and I think you said it earlier as well, but that we should not underestimate children, especially if we're thinking about these are children who are going to be in the future, running businesses and companies and in government and in every facet, participating in every facet of life. We want them to feel like they do belong, that they have a place on planet Earth, but that they also are capable of understanding the world in so many, to really understand truth and to explore truth from so many facets and from perspectives that are not necessarily ones that look the same, or that are the same. Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful and empowering approach, because sure, I mean, like you said, you can get to the math, you can get to the English and science, and those are important to function in the world, but to be able to think abstractly, there's nothing, and critically, there's nothing else like that in the world. I mean, that can take you anywhere. even if you never took calculus, you can think critically. That can create a lot of opportunity and create connections.
Yeah. Well, and I think, one of the other skill sets that I found that came out of at least how I structured my classroom, and I'd started getting into it more and more at the end of being in a classroom. And it's one of the things that as I moved on into a role of professional development and whatnot, is to really help facilitate this idea of collaboration. And it's one of those skills that we're still just really starting to understand how it impacts things. I mean, we know from 21st century, there was a study done about what are the skill sets needed for future careers, that kind of thing. And that's one of those key skills was collaboration. Yet, I even find adults struggle with how do we really collaborate? To me, when I think collaboration, I think of the word consultation as a skill set, and like really being a consultative body. And how do you problem solve something collaboratively where I'm not trying to elevate my agenda? It's like we're all looking at this collectively as we need to resolve this thing over here. And it's going to take all these different perspectives, kind of like when I was talking about how kids are looking at art and you'll keep peeling back new perspectives of that piece of artwork. I think that's the same thing about a collaborative or a consultative process, that you have all these people at the table to look at this thing that we want to try to resolve. How are we going to approach that in a way that really gets to the root of the issue without having to be, I'm trying to elevate myself over another person because I have the right idea. We will collectively come into that. So that's a skill set that I think we're still evolving as a humanity on how to do better.
Absolutely. And I've spoken about this idea with a few guests on the podcast, the idea of like competition versus cooperation and collaboration. And that is interesting when I just a real-time thought thinking about school and that environment. I'm wondering if you could rate, like in terms of percentage, how much of what students are involved in is about competition and how much is about more cooperation and collaboration. I'd be curious to see that breakdown.
Or even breaking it down, the thing that comes to my mind is looking at, okay, what are the principles around consultation or collaboration? What skill sets are needed in order to cultivate that kind of mindset? and then looking at our education system and developing things within the system that helps cultivate that. I've been thinking about this a lot since that book I mentioned earlier, is that we do a lot in education that helps people learn how to articulate themselves. There's writing that's embedded into our education system. There's, in college, we all had to take that speech class, there's a lot of things around communication, but it's all, to me, more on the side about how to have the output of communication. What we don't do a good job in, I think, education that needs to maybe be elevated and will have more bounce, is that part about listening. Because in the communication, there has to be the thing that's being said, and then the listening to what's being said. And we're such a society that's listening to know, to be able to respond, versus listening to really hear what's in the heart of that person, or the thought, and trying to instead of thinking about how am I going to respond next to it. And I feel like that's an area, if I were to get to go back in the classroom, which who knows where I'll go next, how life evolves. But I think that's an area I'm really kind of curious, right? It's been at the top of my mind lately, of like, how do we develop those skill sets of really hearing each other and developing that in kids? Because they don't get a lot of that in the classroom. It's more about how do I write my thoughts down? How do I communicate what I have to say about things, and less about listening to somebody else and really hearing. Don't know the answer, but that's fine.
But I'm following you. I am tracking. I see how that would be critical to creating humans who really can thrive in the world, and who can, come together and transform what is broken or what is not working, or what needs attention. So you're right. That is that half of the skill set of communication. I don't know if maybe it's more than two halves that are involved,
right.
But that part of it is so critical. And again, that's, to me, I always think, and not that English class is about competition, but I think that the nature of competition is about what can I say or do to get myself ahead, and to transform an environment or create a climate that's not about getting ahead. Everyone gets to shine. Everyone gets to make their contribution, but we also need to understand how to do that together, because we're not operating in silos for most. I can't even think of something that really is about a silo in terms of contribution. So it's, maybe there are some professions, but still you do want to know how to engage and to even if you're an artist who works by themselves, you still are observing the world and you're having conversations, and you to enhance your understanding, you've got to be able to be open to receiving and to learning. So anyways, you're right. This is a very important, and I can see what you're saying. Maybe it's been neglected area of our educational system, and there's a lot to say, I'm sure. And I know you're
well, and I mean, even if you look at like just the structure of and I do think it's shifting, it's changing, it's evolving, and that's a good thing. It's that system improving because it needs to. But you look back at the early of the century, what was it? You sat in rows, you raised your hand to speak, and I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing, but I'm just saying it was all about being a receptacle versus engaging in really deeper thinking. And, there's so many technological advances, if we want just facts, then we can just go look it up on a computer. That isn't such a need. The higher need is, can I critically apply this concept that I can go look up that fact? Can I really apply that to life or this new situation and adapt things and have that adaptability? There was something else that you said that just kind of piqued my interest about the siloing. And I feel like the last 2 years in education have really kind of brought this to the forefront when we had to go into lockdown and educators were scurrying to how do we continue to have education provided. And we went into these Zoom spaces and whatnot. And just the I think that kind of made me think that's essentially what happened. Children, as well as the adults, all of us went into these little silos. And what did that do? I mean, even though we had this ability to have connection over long, distances and whatnot, there's something about that authentic interactions that weren't able to occur. And what is that doing to the development of our kids and the spirit of them? I see the spirit of children just a little bit broken right now. It feels like talking with some of them and talking with some of my educator friends. I had the opportunity to substitute teach in a few classrooms during that period, and it was heart wrenching. I mean, I was in art rooms thinking, okay, this will be at least the space that we get to be making art. They're going to want to, and the kids just weren't connecting with each other after coming out of being in Zoom spaces and coming back into the classroom. And you thought, well, they'll certainly be eager. It seems like there needed to be this transition of how to get back into reconnecting with each other. It was just really heart wrenching for me to just see literally a whole class of kids that were not interacting with each other. And this was at like a high school level, and we're typically, they're going to be talking all the time in the classroom, even if it's not even about art, you would think they would at least be talking to each other,
Right.
And there was just no social interaction. I was just kind of blown away by that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is poignant.
Yeah. Not saying that's everywhere necessarily, but that was just
right.
my experience in the couple times I went out and hearing from those teachers. And then the teachers themselves being, which is already you're kind of on an island of your own as an educator. You have these many children that you're interacting with, or students that you're interacting with, but you're kind of out there floating along and doing the best you can. And I think our current societal situations are bringing to the forefront how that's just not healthy, and allowing our educators to be able to really shine. They get that on time in the classroom where I think they're feeling really good, but then as soon as they step off the stage, so to say, it's like, wow, I'm here alone. There's nobody in the audience. I don't know. So.
Melissa, I'm curious, what, in your experience with working in the classroom and, engaging children and their parents, is there something in particular you notice that parents need? What I mean is there a certain kind of support that you're aware of that parents are needing to feel a part of their child's education, but also, trusting that their children will get what they need? And I'm just curious about the parents part of this.
That's a really good bit. That's another thing. Lots of time to think during pandemic break, lockdown time. But I saw some really amazing stories of parents and educators coming together to figure out how are they going to address the needs of the students, the children. And I think that was one thing that kind of came top of mind to me as we've been going through this. And we know research wise that for a child, if they have that that connection between parent and home and school, and there's a strong bond there, that child's going to succeed much better. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes our society puts those two entities in contention with each other. And so I would say parents and educators, both sides, need to really look at what can we do to build the bonds together, that we're coming together for the best interest of the child, which, understanding from the parent perspective that one teacher has 15, 20, 30, 40 other parents in child sets that they're trying to cultivate this relationship with. So anything that parent can do to help build that bond and build that connection of we are in this together. I think we kind of were talking about this a little bit, the whole me versus we, like really looking at the we versus me, my child. And I'm only looking, but really thinking more collectively as a whole of that teacher's really thinking about many children, not just one child. And yes, they are looking at your child and wanting to make the very best for that one child, but they're also keeping at top of mind the 29 other kids in the classroom as well. And so there's a lot of pieces to be balancing, and relationships take time. Relationships take energy, and those are not a lot of things that a teacher has a lot of, because they're juggling so many other things at the same time, So yeah, if parents can maybe take that step and look at that and say, what is it like to be in the shoes of that teacher trying to connect with all the students, and what can I do? Some teachers I've seen do some really neat things at the start of the year where they'll send out kind of like a survey to the parents about, tell me a little bit about how you interact with your child and what works best for your child when it comes to communicating, like various things. And those are really helpful pieces of information to communicate to the teacher so that they can start to think about each child. And because every family dynamic and culture is a little different, and helping that educator understand how your family operates, that's another piece that I think is really helpful to educators from a parent perspective. And really good educators will know how to even weave in some of those understandings about a family, because that family unit is such an important part of that child's development too. And if an educator can kind of naturally pull that in by talking about that holy day or holiday that occurred with the family, or even a food that's eaten because they're celebrating something in the family, or whatever it is, bringing those into the classroom conversations and bring that in. That just helps that sense of belonging we were talking about earlier, and helps that teacher create that environment of belonging. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and as I've said here before, I'm not yet a parent. I plan to be one day, but I know that there is a kind of the sense that for some parents, they really want to kind of be involved, but maybe to a point where it's a little over involved or what have you. I mean, this is not a judgment, because of course it's your child and you want to make sure that, your child is getting the care and the need and their needs met. But sometimes I think about that kind of that, they call them maybe helicopter parents or whatever term. I don't really think about those kinds of terms when it comes to parents. I just think about, well, there's something this parent really feels the need to, pay very close attention to what their children are learning and how they're being treated. And I guess I'm just sympathetic to a parent who maybe is a little more intense in that way. It's understandable that you'd care, and for a parent who has the time and energy to be very involved, in their child's education, it's understandable. But I'm thinking about that again, because the helicopter parent and all of those terms, those are just terms. I don't really, everybody is so different and unique, and every family is so unique, and you don't know what's going on necessarily, in the family home. And I don't mean necessarily bad things, but there's just, we all have life going on. Yeah. The dynamics are so varied, but that idea connects back to your point about, this collaboration, that it seems like finding that balance as a parent and with the teacher, that team, or that, that idea of that we're in this together seems so critical, and that everybody feels like, they're respected, but that everybody's getting what they need out of that relationship is important, but also I imagine can be a tricky balance. So it's hats off to teachers and educators for sure, and to families, who are just trying to make things move forward and help their children.
Well, and I think when you brought up helicopter parents, that term, I don't particularly, but I often wonder if when that gets thrown around, if we were to spin that and just look at it, we don't know what that parent's experience in school was. And so maybe they're reacting from a space of having had, and in the history of our education system, there were some practices that maybe weren't the very best practices, and we've learned and we're changing them and that sort of thing. And so sometimes it takes a while to help that parent, especially the really young kids because they're just entering the education system, and that parent is reacting from their experience in an education system. And so helping the educators looking at it and saying, how can I help this parent see that this is not the same system that they were in, that the system has evolved or hopefully has, or just addressing what are your biggest concerns for your child in this classroom, so again, it's a team effort of consulting and talking about those things. And again, that might take a bit of time, but I think if that's set up at the very beginning, kind of like I was talking about how I'd set up my environment for my kids at the beginning of the school year, that allows for so much more growth to happen throughout the rest of the school year, and it's just maybe baby checks in a sense throughout the year and course correcting here and there little bits versus having something go down a certain path that's veering so far away that it's so hard to course correct between the parent and the educator. So really coming together as a team and putting that time and effort in is important in the beginning. Might help. I don't know. Yeah. It just seems to me, it just makes sense. But
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Melissa. Well, is there anything else you wanted to discuss? Any points you want to bring up?
No, this is great. I just, I've just been thinking a lot about educators. They're near and dear to my heart, and also children. And I love that you brought up the parent point. And I think that's part of the key in this system reset, in a sense, that has to go on, is that as we evolve forward, it's like, how can we really come together as a team between parent or family, whatever that family unit looks like, with educators, and approaching it collaboratively and really consulting with each other and not. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes educators are coming at it, understanding the brain development, understanding the educational needs, yet sometimes forgetting that parents know a whole lot about their children, those years built up before they maybe enter that preschool setting, that have valuable keys to how to unlock that child's love of learning, because I think every kid kind of has that innately built into them. And how do we continue to cultivate that and not clog that up? I think of my three children as they entered the education system, my middle child especially. I mean, he just had this exuberance about learning and this energy, which was a lot for the educators to understand. And so it was like, how do we maintain that exuberance and that love of learning without dampening it? It's such a fine line of understanding, okay, you can't have chaos in the classroom, but at the same time, can we still allow kids to be truly their authentic selves in this space, and help them develop the skill sets they need to have to be able to cooperate with others and balance things out in the classroom. But it's a tricky wicket, no matter how you look at it.
It's like alchemy, right? You just need the right, portions and right temperature, but that can change even from day to day, I imagine.
Yeah. And I think
that's so interesting.
The word grace comes to mind, like just having grace for everybody, the educator to the parent and the family, and to the student to the teacher, especially as they get older and understand more, and the parents to the educator. Just everybody just having a little more grace with each other. It's become my new word that I've really kind of latched onto lately. Grace for myself, even. I just,
yes,
just kind of
sounds so good.
Yeah, doesn't it? Just how do you get to it and how do you maintain it is a whole other question.
That's
at least if we can start with the concept of allowing ourselves that, I think is essential. So.
Absolutely. And I think your exercise of check your baggage at the door for young people and is a really beautiful way to, at least in the educational system, to start that process so children can create grace and honor themselves too. You have to learn. You have to learn how to do that, learn what that looks like. And sure, kids very well could have learned that before they arrived at school, but to make sure that's
Continue
fostered in school is, and yes, and the continuing progress of that is, it's all about empowerment.
And just imagine, let's say we have a whole generation of children that go through something like that. Then what does that look like when they carry that off into the work world and the corporate world, and how they interact with each other, and how problems get addressed and solved if they, I think that's the next piece to it too. How do we continue that evolution of that kind of interaction? I mean, that's why I think education is such an essential part of a humanities system, because without it, my favorite quote, I used to have it, the tagline of my email is the one I have it written down here. So, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education alone can cause it to reveal its treasures, enable mankind to benefit therefrom. And I think that's essentially what we're talking about here, is like, with really well done education, we can shift an entire generation, and that's going to have an impact that reverberates on into the future for generations to come, if we can just really get to the core of what we need to let go of from the past that's no longer needed in our system of education, and what are some of the skills and things we need to maybe explore and add to the educational system.
Well, Melissa, I'm hopeful. This conversation has made me more hopeful to know that there are people within the system like yourself who are thinking about, who are having consultation about these very ideas and the topic of evolving education to truly benefit children and society. So I'm hopeful. Yeah. It's not being neglected. It's quite a feat, but it's worth every ounce of energy and time and blood, sweat, and tears. But it like you said, that it's the community involved, the teachers, the families, the children, and everybody else who supports schools, and everybody has to support the evolution of the educational system. So we're all in it together in one way or another. So
I think the hopeful part that comes out of it, hopefully, I hope, because I know a lot of educators out there are struggling, and parents are struggling, children are struggling, is just knowing that the system has to break down. It's kind of like getting to their bottom so that we can start to build up. And I think that's really where we're at right now. But just knowing that we are going to rise up out of it like a phoenix, we are going to improve this. It is going to get better, and not just be looking like we're on some downward spiral that's going to continue to go to a never-ending spiral down, that we're kind of hitting that bottom, I feel, and we're rising up now. We're starting to recognize what are the pieces, and just maybe that's the hopeful piece to hold on to, knowing we're going to get there, not just because maybe somebody like me maybe has these thoughts, but it's just, it has to happen that way. It's having that faith that it's going to do that. So that's at least what I hold on to.
I hear that. I hear you.
Yeah.
And warms my heart. Well, Melissa, as I do with every podcast at the end, I always ask my guest, and I'll ask you now, which television show, new or old, do you recommend and why?
All right. I have to go with the one that's on the top of my mind right now, and it's coming to an end of its series, but This Is Us. The big three, and at the very opening of that series, there's a line that the doctor gives this new mother of 3 infants of making lemonade out of lemons, and I've like, anyways, this whole series, it's like you're constantly on this roller coaster of emotion every time. And my husband that walks into the room, he'll just be like, he'll sit down and start watching, even though he doesn't watch the show, but he'll watch the show, and he goes, dang it, every time it gets you in the feel. So that's my go-to. I love that show because it just shows the rawness of humanity and families, and how they are struggling through what life is throwing at them. And you're seeing it it's beautifully done, the way they've constructed this show, looking at the past and the present and the future and everything. But you just see this whole life experience through the lens of these three kids and this family. So yeah, that's mine.
That is a good one.
Yeah. And I'm so sad it's coming to an end. I don't know what I'm going to do. So,
you and I'm sure millions of people.
Yes, I know. I was like, oh. But, yeah, just a couple episodes left. Then it's back to reruns. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank
That's the beauty of
and all those. You can just go back and watch them all over again. So.
That's right. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. I've enjoyed our conversation, and it's been inspiring. I have some new thoughts to explore.
New thing. Okay, well, good. We'll glimmer on them and glean from them and whatever else. So thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed this too. It's gotten me deeper thinking and, thinking about where's the journey going next, right? So.
Yes.